Hantavirus strikes. On an international cruise ship, people were infected with the Andes strain, resulting in 3 deaths. Of the 147 people from 24 countries, they have now dispersed all over the world. There are contacts in the Netherlands, Germany, the UK, Switzerland, France, Canada, the US, Singapore, and South Africa. What's bizarre is that someone had already predicted back in 2022 that the hantavirus would break out in 2026. The Simpsons cartoon once again made an eerily accurate prediction about a cruise ship and the hantavirus. What's even more amazing is that even the cover of the Economist magazine contains hidden clues predicting that the virus will break out around April or May of 2026. Will hantavirus become the next big pandemic? Let's look at the world together with Wei. I'm Chen-Wei Yu, and today we're going to talk about the hantavirus, which has been getting the most attention these past couple of days. Why is everyone suddenly talking about this topic? Where does the hantavirus come from? How deadly is it? Can it be transmitted from person to person? These are some of the main concerns people have. As early as 2018, the World Health Organization had already listed the hantavirus as a candidate pathogen for disease X. Many countries have already started researching hantavirus vaccines, and this time, the cruise ship infection case happened to occur right before the U.S. midterm elections. The last COVID-19 pandemic also broke out before the U.S. presidential election. Is this just a coincidence, or is there some kind of deliberate intent? Today, let's take a closer look at these puzzling matters. First, let's talk about what happened with the virus outbreak on the cruise ship. The story starts in November 2025. A retired Dutch couple who love nature planned to go on their dream adventure trip to South America. So when did it all begin? On November 27th, 2025. They traveled throughout South America for more than 4 months, heading south through Chile, Uruguay, and Argentina, with their destination being Ushuaia, the southernmost city on Earth in Argentina. There, they boarded a luxury expedition cruise ship. The MV Hondius set off on a dream journey to Antarctica and the remote islands of the South Atlantic. It sounded like the perfect trip of a lifetime, but no one knew that before boarding, the couple had already quietly brought a deadly virus with them. According to the itinerary reconstructed by the Argentine Ministry of Health, during their travels in South America, the couple crossed the border between Argentina and Chile multiple times and visited 2 places that the WHO has listed as endemic areas for the hantavirus. One was Neuquén province in southwestern Argentina, and the other was Misiones province in northeastern Argentina. The most likely hypothesis is that the couple inhaled hantavirus-carrying rodent aerosols while birdwatching at a landfill near Ushuaia. On April 1, 2026, the MV Radius set sail from Ushuaia with a total of 147 people on board from 24 different countries. Among the passengers were Spaniards, British, Americans, Germans, Dutch, and Filipinos. It was truly a United Nations cruise ship. Just 5 days after departure, on April 6th, a Dutch male passenger, the so-called patient 0, began experiencing symptoms of fever, headache, abdominal pain, and diarrhea. It sounded like a typical stomach bug or maybe just seasickness, so no one was particularly alarmed. 5 days later, on April 11th, he died on the ship, cause of death unknown, and no microbiological tests were performed. His body was simply left on board and wasn't removed until 2 weeks later. On April 24th, the ship docked at St. Helena Island, the same small island where Napoleon was exiled. The Dutchman's wife had already started experiencing gastrointestinal symptoms by this time, but she chose to disembark and boarded a commercial flight from St. Helena to Johannesburg, South Africa. There were 82 passengers on this flight and 6 crew members. During the flight, his condition rapidly worsened, and after landing, he was rushed straight to the hospital for emergency treatment. On April 26th, he died in Johannesburg. On May 4th, the test results came back. It was confirmed to be hantavirus. On that same day, April 24th, something else happened. 23 passengers, completely unaware of the situation, disembarked early at St. Helena Island and flew back to different parts of the world. Australia, Taiwan, the United States, the United Kingdom, the Netherlands. When these people left, the outbreak on the ship still hadn't been confirmed. No one notified them and no one tracked them. Later, a passenger who was still on the ship told Spanish media that there were 23 people out and about, and that until 3 days ago, no one had contacted them at all. So what that means is, if any of these people were already carrying the virus, they would have come into contact with even more people. On April 27th, the ship continued sailing to Ascension Island. A 56-year-old British passenger, Martin Andis, who was an expedition guide on the cruise, saw his condition worsen and had to be urgently evacuated by air to an intensive care unit in Johannesburg, South Africa. On May 2nd, a 65-year-old German female passenger died on the ship from pneumonia symptoms. By this point, 3 people had died on board. Jointly announced that the virus responsible for this outbreak has been confirmed as the Andes Hantavirus. This is currently the only known hantavirus strain in the world that can be transmitted from person to person. WHO Director General Tedros officially announced that human-to-human transmission has already occurred on the cruise ship. On the same day, 3 patients were urgently evacuated and flown to the Netherlands on a medical charter flight. This included the 56-year-old British guide, a 41-year-old Dutch crew member, and a 65-year-old German citizen. Switzerland also confirmed that a man who disembarked from the cruise ship and returned to Zurich was diagnosed with the infection after seeking medical treatment on his own. He is currently in isolation and receiving treatment at Zurich University Hospital. The virus has already landed. There were still 147 people from mainland Europe on the ship. Where did they go? The cruise ship tried to dock at the port of Tenerife in Spain's Canary Islands, but the Canary Islands refused entry, citing a lack of transparency about the outbreak and an inability to guarantee the safety of island residents. This was an understandable and correct decision. However, the WHO immediately pushed back, arguing that Spain had a moral obligation to help the people on the ship instead of letting them continue drifting in the Atlantic. In the end, Spain overruled local opposition and forcibly approved the cruise ship's docking. The cruise ship is expected to arrive locally in the early hours of Sunday, May 10th. So far, the Andes hantavirus has already caused 3 deaths, with at least 6 confirmed infections and 9 suspected cases. The countries where symptomatic individuals are located include South Africa, the Netherlands, Germany, Switzerland, and St. Helena. Countries with people who have had contact with the infected include France, Singapore, Canada, the United States, and the United Kingdom. A birdwatching trip has turned into a journey of death. This isn't the end, it's just the beginning. Because the incubation period for the hantavirus can be up to 8 weeks, the story is far from over. When many people hear the name hantavirus, their first reaction is, oh no, another new virus. But actually, that's not the case. Humans have known about the hantavirus for nearly 50 years. It's not new at all. The story actually starts with the Korean War. In the 1950s, large numbers of UN soldiers began to develop a strange illness on the battlefield. High fever, bleeding, kidney failure, the death rate was extremely high, but no one knew what was causing it. This mystery lasted for nearly 30 years, until 1976, when Korean virologist Ho Wang Lee finally isolated the pathogen that had been hiding for so many years from wild mice near the Han River in Korea. The virus was named after the river and called Hantavirus. That's how this whole family officially entered the human spotlight. So, where does the Hantavirus live? It lives in mice. This is the key point. Mice infected with Hantavirus don't get sick themselves. They just silently shed the virus continuously through their urine, feces, and saliva. After these excretions dry out, the virus can float in the air as an aerosol, and as long as a person inhales it, they could get infected. So, when cleaning out abandoned warehouses or disturbing enclosed spaces that haven't been cleaned for a long time, there's a high risk. This also explains why that Dutch couple got infected while birdwatching at a landfill, because they had no idea what they were inhaling. The hantavirus family actually has more than 20 subtypes that can infect humans, which are generally divided into 2 categories. Those found in the Old World, meaning Asia and Europe. Old World hantaviruses mainly attack the kidneys and cause hemorrhagic fever with renal syndrome. China is the largest epidemic area in the world, accounting for over 90% of global cases. In the Americas, the prevalent type is the New World Hantavirus, which mainly attacks the lungs and causes Hantavirus pulmonary syndrome. This is the same type as the outbreak on the cruise ship this time, with a fatality rate as high as 35% to 50%. So how does it kill people? After entering the human body, hantavirus mainly attacks the endothelial cells of blood vessels. But it doesn't directly kill a large number of cells. Instead, it triggers an excessive response from the body's immune system. In other words, a cytokine storm causes a sudden increase in the permeability of microvessels throughout the body. A large amount of plasma leaks into the tissues. For strains that attack the lungs, this results in rapid fluid buildup in the lungs, acute respiratory distress and shock, and ultimately leads to multiple organ failure. The incubation period is usually 1 to 8 weeks. In the early stages of the illness, it feels a lot like the flu: fever, muscle aches, and gastrointestinal discomfort, so it's easy to overlook. But often, within just a few hours to a few days, the condition can suddenly take a sharp turn for the worse. For the most critical patients, it can be as little as 2 days from the onset of symptoms to death. What's even more challenging is that there are currently no specific treatments or widely used vaccines. It's all about supportive care, and whether a patient survives largely depends on whether they can be admitted to the ICU in time before their condition worsens. Now, at this point, a lot of people might ask, if it's so dangerous, why hasn't it ever caused a large-scale outbreak before? The reason is that in the vast majority of cases, once a person is infected with hantavirus, that's the end of it. It doesn't get transmitted to others. Humans are not long-term hosts for hantavirus. After a person is infected, the period of viremia is very short, so it doesn't create a sustained chain of transmission. That's why, even though hantavirus infects tens of thousands of people worldwide every year, it has never caused a pandemic. But among all known hantaviruses, there is one unique exception, and that's the Andes virus, the main character in this cruise ship incident. The Andes virus is mainly found in Argentina and Chile and was first documented in 1995. Scientists quickly discovered that this strain has abilities that no other hantavirus possesses. It can be transmitted from person to person, but exactly how does it spread, and how efficient is its transmission? For a long time, the scientific community actually lacked sufficient and direct evidence to answer these questions. It wasn't until 2018 to 2019 that an outbreak occurred in Argentina that made researchers gasp in shock. It happened in a small town in the Patagonian region of Argentina after a birthday party. The outbreak began to spread from there. Afterwards, researchers carefully reconstructed the contact history of every infection case. They compiled a piece of evidence that was deeply unsettling. Several of these cases are still repeatedly cited to this day. Case 1 and Case 4 were infected at the birthday party, but these two people had no physical contact at all. They just brushed past each other in the hallway, said hello, and didn't even sit together. Case 1 and Case 36. At that same party, they sat at different tables, only about 1 to 2 meters apart, and still got infected. There was another case that was even more surprising. It involved an administrative staff member at a very small rural hospital in the area. The research report specifically described the size of this hospital, saying it was about the size of a small, single-story house. This administrative staff member had never had any close or physical contact with any of the infected individuals. But because he had to frequently go in and out of the ward where the infected patients were, he ended up getting infected that way. There was another case where 2 patients simply shared the same hospital room. They had no direct contact at all. One of them developed symptoms 22 days later, according to another case. In that case, the virus may have spread because the infected person used a respirator incorrectly, causing the virus to leak into the air and infect a coworker. So, what does this study tell us? It tells us that the transmission of Andes virus probably doesn't even require so-called close contact at all. It spreads through the air in aerosols. Being just 1 or 2 meters apart, saying hello, or simply staying in the same enclosed space could all be enough to cause infection. This is very different from what the WHO has always said, that it requires prolonged and close contact to spread. There's actually a significant gap between what they've said and the reality. The closed cabins, shared corridors, and recirculating air conditioning system on a cruise ship are almost identical in terms of transmission conditions to that small hospital in Aprian. That's exactly why this cruise ship outbreak has made so many infectious disease experts so nervous. Now that we've talked about what hantavirus is, let's move on to a few things that many people find pretty unsettling when you think about them. First, let me make it clear. The questions I'm bringing up are all topics people are already discussing online. I'm not promoting any conspiracy theories. I'm just putting these issues out there for everyone to think about and judge for themselves. The first clue is that the WHO had already listed hantavirus as a candidate pathogen for disease X. So, what is disease X? A lot of people might not be familiar with this term. In 2018, the World Health Organization put together a list of dangerous pathogens that should be prioritized for research. This list included viruses we're all familiar with, like Ebola, SARS, and MERS. But at the very end of the list, they added a special entry. It's called Disease X. What it means is that the next major pandemic could very likely come from a pathogen that we either don't know about yet or haven't paid enough attention to. The WHO officially included hantavirus on the list of Disease X candidates. In other words, as early as 2018, the world's top health authority was already publicly saying that hantavirus had the potential to trigger the next global pandemic. Then, in 2024, WHO Director General Tedros publicly stated at the World Economic Forum in Davos that the next pandemic is not a question of if, but when. He also called on all countries to hand over the authority to respond to pandemics to a unified global framework for management. In May 2025, the World Health Assembly officially adopted the Pandemic Agreement. Then, almost exactly 1 year after the agreement was passed, in May 2026, the hantavirus cruise ship outbreak occurred. This became the first truly multinational, coordinated international pandemic response since the agreement was enacted. Doesn't the timeline seem incredibly neat? The second clue is the timing of the vaccine development. In July 2024, the Vaccine Innovation Center at Korea University College of Medicine announced a collaboration with American pharmaceutical giant Moderna to jointly develop an mRNA-based hantavirus vaccine. At the time, this news didn't attract much attention. After all, hantavirus was a pretty niche topic. But looking back now, the timing seems rather intriguing. Development of the hantavirus vaccine began in 2024. In 2026, a hantavirus outbreak occurred on a cruise ship. Moderna's stock price started to rise, and a lot of people immediately thought of the same narrative as with the COVID-19 pandemic. A virus emerges, vaccine companies profit, and the vaccine was already prepared in advance. People online are already saying this is the exact same playbook, but here I want to add an important bit of background. Moderna has actually been funding research institutions around the world through its mRNA Access program. They support the development of vaccines for all kinds of potential threats. Hantavirus is not the only one, and right now, this vaccine is still in the preclinical stage. Human trials haven't even started yet. What's even more important is that South Korea has a deep historical connection to hantavirus research. The first person to isolate the hantavirus was a Korean scientist, Ho-Wong Lee, whose team developed the first generation of inactivated hantavirus vaccine back in 1990. So, South Korea's continued deep involvement in this field actually follows a very natural scientific trajectory. There's also a timeline here that's quite intriguing. On March 30th, 2026, the team led by Zhang Fanglin and Ye Wei from the Air Force Medical University in China published research results on a new type of hantavirus vaccine in the journal Nature Communications. The results are reportedly 4 times more effective than the current available vaccines. Then, just 7 days later, on April 6th, the first patient appeared on the MV Redius cruise ship. Of course, there are a few points that need to be clarified here. The Chinese research targeted the Hantavirus strain prevalent in Asia, which is not the same as the Andes virus found on the cruise ship. China has the highest number of Hantavirus cases in the world, accounting for over 90% globally, so their long-term development of related vaccines is understandable. But it's worth noting that this research institution is the Air Force Medical University, which is affiliated with the Chinese military. Do you think this is just normal scientific preparation, or could some things have been premeditated? Type 3 in the comments if you think this was premeditated, or 6 if you think it's just normal scientific research. If you think all of this is just a conspiracy theory, then some of these predictions will sound truly unbelievable. In June 2022, there was an X account called I Am a Smooth Sailor. The meaning of this name is basically I'm a prophet. They posted a message with just one sentence: COVID will end in 2023, Hantavirus in 2026. This account only ever posted 4 messages, all in June 2022, and after that, it was never updated again. The author has never given any explanation for that post. After the outbreak, this post quickly went viral. Now it has over 250,000 likes and 100,000 shares. A lot of people are asking, who is this person? How did they know? Of course, the rational explanation is that this might just be a random prediction that happened to come true. It's like someone predicting there will be earthquakes every year. If you say it enough times, eventually you'll be right a few times. But the problem is, this wasn't a broad prediction like saying there will be some kind of natural disaster in a certain year or month. It was very specific, clearly mentioning both the hantavirus and the year 2026 together. That's why this post has creeped out so many people. And then there's The Simpsons. This cartoon has predicted so many real-life events over the decades, from Trump being elected president to the COVID-19 pandemic. Every time it sparked heated discussions online. So what about this time? Someone dug up scenes from The Simpsons involving cruise ships and viruses, claiming that it predicted this event once again. Now, I have to say, The Simpsons has been around for over 30 years. With over 700 episodes, just about every kind of storyline has shown up. So it's not surprising that you can find real-life events that match up after the fact. But every time these coincidences happen, people still can't help but wonder, is it just the creator's imagination, or do they know something we don't? There's also The Economist. The covers of The Economist are famous for their subtle symbolic language. Every year at the beginning of the year, their cover is seen by many as a kind of prediction of major events for that year. This year is no exception. At the end of 2025, they released the cover for the World Ahead 2026. If you look at the whole image as a clock, with 12 marks representing the 12 months, then the symbol at each position might hint at a major event happening in that month. At first, a lot of people thought this was reading too much into it. But as 2026 went by, month after month, some of the symbols started to match up with real events, making people have to take another serious look at this cover. Today, we're only going to talk about the parts related to the hantavirus. Take a look at the positions for April and May. The symbols, a syringe and a medical sign, led people interpreting this cover to believe that April and May corresponded exactly to a public health crisis and an outbreak of an epidemic. And now, the hantavirus cruise ship incident just happened to break out in May. As for the other months, we won't get into them today. There's just too much content in this cover's design. We can do a dedicated episode to go into detail about it later. There's also another sensitive issue that makes people uneasy, and that's the timing. This time, the hantavirus outbreak on the cruise ship happened in May 2025, exactly 6 months before the U.S. midterm elections. The last time, it was the COVID-19 outbreak that erupted on a large scale right before the 2020 U.S. presidential election, and the pandemic profoundly changed the way that election was conducted. Widespread mail-in voting was quickly implemented in multiple states. The entire set of election rules was rewritten under the pretext of the pandemic. So this time, with the Republican Party in power, Trump's approval ratings under pressure, and the Democrats actively preparing for the election, will a new pandemic narrative once again become a tool to influence the election? The mainstream assessment from the WHO and infectious disease experts in various countries is that hantavirus does not have the high transmissibility of COVID-19 and is unlikely to cause a major outbreak. The CDC has even classified the response to this incident as the lowest level, a level 3 emergency response. The WHO has even advised people not to take ivermectin to treat hantavirus. But after going through the last pandemic, how many people still trust the WHO and those so-called experts? What about the beneficiaries of the vaccine economy? Actually, I believe that nothing that happens in this world is accidental. Humanity has come to this point, moral decay, the corruption of people's hearts and turning away from God, it's all reached a very deep level. Wars, plagues, and natural disasters have never been just natural phenomena or political events. On a deeper level, these are warnings from God to humanity, and even a way of eliminating people. Just like the end of every civilization in history, it never started from the outside, but from internal decay. In my view, 2026 will be a year of great elimination, not just of the physical body, but more importantly, of the choices made by the soul. In this era, what do you choose to believe in? What kind of person do you choose to become? Which side do you choose to stand on? All of these are your answers to God. So, what we really should be worried about isn't the hantavirus or war, but whether our hearts can still remain genuine and kind. Can we still hear the voice of God? During the last pandemic, we learned to stock up on supplies and to recognize lies. But if a great plague comes again, besides these preparations, have we learned to reflect, repent, and pray to God? Let's all take a moment to quiet down and seriously think about it. In this era of great elimination, are we truly prepared?